Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The afternoon session is, of course, on health and innovation. I'm Kenneth Cukier. I'm the data editor of The Economist. As an introduction, let me please rivet your mind on what would happen right now if you were brought into a hospital. The first things they would do is they would attach wires to you and tubes to you. They would take lots of measurements. They'd understand your heartbeat. They'd know your respiration. They'd have your temperature. They would understand lots of other parts of your vital signs and your biochemistry, but they wouldn't actually really use that information. They might, in the moment, to determine if, say, it was a heart attack or if it was simply a diabetes and you were in shock, but they don't take the data, they don't store it, they don't aggregate it, they don't reprocess it, and they don't learn from it. I do believe in about 20 years, we will think that the most valuable part of patient care, the data associated with the people, simply gets thrown out like a used bandage, and that's a great shame. We can imagine that in 20 years, we will be doing things differently. We'll be using data in real time, processing it, and having learned from it. Now, among all of the crises that are facing healthcare, going to the hospital is just one. Among the biggest problems in society is the issue of dementia and Alzheimer's, because it's going to affect so many people. Already 44 million people in the world today. By 2050, it's going to be 3 times that number. Thankfully, today, we have a panel that can talk both about healthcare and innovation, as well as particularly the issues facing society due to Alzheimer's. Let me introduce them right now, tell you the order of the day, and begin the panel. First, we'll hear from Shinya Yamanaka. He is a professor at Kyoto University and best known for his research in stem cells, with which he won a Nobel Prize. It's an honor. Also on our panel today is Monika Koszynska. Monika is the Secretary General of the European Public Health Alliance. On the panel also is Mark Pearson. He is the Deputy Director for Employment, Labor, and Social Affairs here at the OECD. Helga Roja is the Chair of the European Working Group of People with Dementia. And Cyril Schriver is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director of MSD France. To begin, let us hear a keynote speech from Professor Yamanaka. Professor.
Bonjour. Well, that's the only one French I can speak. So thank you very much for the introduction. It is a tremendous honor to be given this opportunity to talk at such a renowned forum of OECD. I feel greatly privileged. Thank you very much. Well, if I can have my first slide, I don't know. So today, I'm going to talk about VW. Well, I will not talk about German automobile. I only have Toyota. I'm going to talk about my motto. I started my career as a surgeon 27 years ago, not as a scientist. It was my father who talked me into medicine. And this is my father. I respected him a lot. I liked him a lot. Well, I like his hair. Actually, I even envious. He had a small business. He had a small factory, and I was his own son. So I was his own successor. But when I became a junior high school student, he started saying this way, Shinya, you should not take over my business. You should become a doctor to help patients. I don't know why he said that way. Maybe he thought his son was not brave enough or smart enough to be a businessman. Or maybe he thought his son was too awkwardly honest to be a businessman. I don't know the real reason. But anyway, I listened to him and I became a doctor. My father passed away 26 years ago when I still needed him a lot. Before he died, he must have been in pain. However, he seemed to be happy by receiving some small medical procedures from his own son. He must have been proud of his son becoming a doctor. Soon after he died, I decided to change my career. I escaped from hospital. I had two reasons for my career change. First, we could not help many patients, like my father, like patients suffering from spinal cord injuries. In addition, I found myself not talented at all in surgery. Actually, I was terrible. So instead of being a doctor, I thought I should become a scientist because it is science who may be able to help these patients in the future. I went to graduate school to get PhD. Well, I was afraid that my father got upset by my career change. I could hear his voice. Shinya, stop shaking test tubes and go back to clinics. Well, despite his voice, I decided to continue my scientific training as a postdoctoral fellow in the States. I joined Gladstone Institute in San Francisco. This is my then mentor, Dr. Tom Inenarity, and myself. The purpose of this slide is to show you that I used to have more hairs. So it was at Gladstone where I learned VW. This is the then president of the institute, Dr. Mady. And one day, he taught us postdoc, young scientists, how to succeed in science. And he said, the key is VW. Well, he had VW, but in this case, he was not talking about his favorite German automobile. In this case, VW means vision and hard work. Well, it's a very simple word, but it's a very simple message. But it was a very strong message to me. I was, and I am, working very hard. However, when I was asked what my vision was, I could not answer immediately. Was it to publish papers? Was it to get grants from NIH? Was it to get awards? No, of course not. I then recall that my vision, the reason why I became a scientist, was to help patients by science. at Gladstone Institute, I also met very important cells, embryonic stem cells, ES cells. ES cells are stem cells that scientists generate from embryos. They were first generated from mouse embryos in 1981, and in 1998, Dr. James Thompson successfully generated ES cells from human embryos. ES cells have two important properties. First, we can expand ES cells as much as we want. They can grow infinitely. And then, after expanding, we can make virtually all types of somatic and germ cells from ES cells. From mouse ES cells, we can even make new mice. Because of those two important properties, when the human ES cells were first announced, we got very excited because we may be able to help patients by using human ES cells. We can prepare many types of human cells from human ES cells, like brain cells, heart muscle cells, pancreatic cells, and so on. By transplanting those cells into patients, we should be able to treat patients suffering from various intractable diseases and injuries, such as Parkinson's diseases, heart failure, and spinal cord injuries. So we got very excited. However, at the same time, human ES cells face a very high hurdle from the ethical point of view. Because we have to use human embryos, many people are still against the usage of human embryos and human ES cells, including the president and the Pope. Soon after the announcement of human ES cells, I was recruited as an associate professor at Nara Institute of Science and Technology in Japan. I got my own laboratory for the first time. As you can see here, this institute has a beautiful campus. They have updated equipment. They have many good faculty members. And most importantly, they have many talented and hardworking graduate students. The very first thing I did after getting my own first laboratory is to set up a long-term goal of my own lab. Because my vision is to help patients by science, I set this as a long-term goal of my own laboratory, to make ES cell-like stem cells, not from human embryos, but from adult skin cells or blood cells. Of course, I knew this goal is very difficult. I knew it would take 20 years, 30 years, or even longer. But I did not tell that to my students. I just told them how wonderful it would be if we could achieve this goal. And my students worked very hard. And to our surprise, it did not take 20 or 30 years. It took 6 years before we achieved this goal. In 2006, we became able to generate stem cells that are very similar to ES cells from adult mouse skin cells by just putting 4 genes. We designated these new types of stem cells, iPS cells, induced pluripotent stem cells. In the following year, 2007, we and other groups became able to generate human iPS cells from adult human cells. So I want to tell you that it was not by myself. It was these young scientists, especially these 3 young scientists who actually generated iPS cells. Kazutoshi Takahashi and Yoshimi Tokuzawa were 2 of my very first PhD students. Tomoko Ichisaka was my very first research associate. Without the devoting work of these 3 young scientists, we could have never generated iPS cells, at least in my own laboratory. I really appreciate their hard works from the bottom of my heart. So now, we can make iPS cells from your blood samples. We don't have to use skin cells. All we need is a small amount of peripheral blood samples. By introducing those small number of genes, we can convert blood cells into stem cells, iPS cells. We cannot expand blood cells, but we can expand iPS cells as much as we want. And from these iPS cells, we can generate various types of somatic human cells, like this kind of beating heart cells. When I first saw this, my own heart synchronized. I still remember that moment. So this is what we can do. We want to do with iPS cells. We want to bring iPS cells into patients, into clinics. So again, my vision is to help patients by science. But I now have a more specific vision. It is to bring iPS cells to patients. It is not only my own vision, it is our vision, because thousands of scientists and physicians are now working very hard to bring iPS cells into patients. There are 2 major applications of iPS cells in medicine. First, we can transplant heart cells or brain cells derived from iPS cells into patients as a cell therapy. Alternatively, we can use iPS cells in making disease models and developing new drugs. Let me give you a few examples of these 2 applications. Dr. Jun Takahashi in our institute has been working on Parkinson's disease. In these patients, a specific type of brain cell known as dopaminergic neurons are degenerated and results in the impaired movement of the patients. Dr. Takahashi, Jun Takahashi, is planning to transplant dopaminergic neurons derived from iPS cells into patients. He is now confirming the safety and efficacy in monkey. We are hoping that he will initiate clinical trial within the next 2 to 3 years. We have been collaborating another Dr. Takahashi, Dr. Masayo Takahashi, in Kobe Riken Institute. She is planning to transplant retinal pigmental epithelial cells derived from iPS cells into patients suffering from macular degeneration. which is a major cause of blindness. Her application has been already approved by the Japanese government. So she is going to initiate the very first clinical trial using human iPS cells sometimes this year. Well, as you may be aware, this Dr. Takahashi and the previous Dr. Jun Takahashi are husband and wife. They only talk about iPS cells at home. I have been trying to persuade them to talk something sweeter, but I found it more difficult than cell therapy. We have been also using iPS cells in drug development. Dr. Haruhisa Inoue has generated iPS cells from many Alzheimer's patients. In this slide, he generated iPS cells from 4 Alzheimer's patients who all have very similar symptoms. But when he generated iPS cells and he generated brain cells from iPS cells, he found a deposit of abnormal proteins known as A-beta oligomers in 2 patients. I don't know how to use this. So the deposit is shown by blue dots. So the first patient and the 4th patient showed the deposit of abnormal A-beta oligomers. And he also found that an essential fatty acid, DHA, showed a protective effect on those 2 patients who have A-beta oligomer deposit. However, in the other 2 patients, the 2nd patient and the 3rd patient, he did not observe such deposit of abnormal proteins. And also, he did not observe the protective effect of DHA. So this experiment using iPS cells clearly showed that each Alzheimer's patient is different, although their symptoms are very similar. We need to use different drugs for different Alzheimer's patients. Otherwise, it's going to be a waste of time and money to use a wrong medicine for patients. It's very important. This is a work done by a venture company in California. They also utilized iPS cells from Alzheimer's patients. And they identified a new form of tau protein, which they designated e-tau. They found that e-tau are secreted from diseased neurons into extracellular matrix and then spread into surrounding normal neurons and make them sick. So this spread of e-tau proteins is an important cause of the progression of Alzheimer's disease. They have developed a specific antibody against e-tau, and they found that e-tau antibody effectively blocks the spread of e-tau into surrounding neurons, and thus preventing progression of Alzheimer's disease. So this company is now trying to initiate phase 1 clinical trial as early as 2015 And as a matter of fact, this company has just a few days ago or has been acquired by one of mega farmers. So this example clearly has proven the potential of iPSL platform in drug development. So again, this is our vision. We want to bring iPS cells into patients as quickly as possible. I found that to translate scientific findings into clinics is like to make complete a jigsaw puzzle. We need many pieces to complete this puzzle. Well, science, of course, is an important piece. However, science alone, the piece of science alone, cannot complete this game. We need many other pieces like ethics, patents, regulation, public relation, international collaboration, collaboration with industries, and preclinical trial, clinical trial, and GMP production. We need experts for each piece. Any scientists alone cannot do this. It's a team effort. So I know it's a still long way to go to bring iPS cells to patients. However, I really want to achieve that goal. I really want to bring iPS cells to patients. I really want to help patients by science before I meet my father again in the near future. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Professor Yamanaka. Thank you. So before we move on to the panelists, allow me to explain that there is an interactive feature to our panel. If you have a smartphone or a tablet computer, you can go onto a system, and it is called oecdblue, and you can ask a question of the panelists discreetly by typing it in through the system oecdblue. We will see it here, and we can then add it to the conversation without interrupting the flow of the conversation. First, allow me to ask the other co-panelists. Dozo. First, allow me to ask the other co-panelists to present a few views of their own in terms of this issue of healthcare and innovation, and perhaps building on the remarks that we've just heard. Monica, let's start with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, first of all, for that fantastic presentation and very interesting for all of us. And I want to use it as the example to illustrate some of the points that I wanted to talk in the panel today. Because actually, this fantastic, groundbreaking, revolutionary and disruptive technology that Professor Yamanaka and his colleagues created is very rare. When we think of innovation in health and healthcare, we think of technological and scientific breakthroughs, and actually they don't happen very often, and there's some very good reasons why not, some of which because actually and fundamentally we have achieved a lot of our innovation in health. We had these fantastic booms in the 60s and the 70s, these quick wins, if you like, and what we have now got to on a scientific level is the difficult hard work, the VW, the vision and the hard work that means putting in the time and resources over time. So by very definition, the low-level fruit has mostly gone, so we need to invest the money and resources to get the high-level fruit. But also, our system isn't designed to allow this innovation to deliver, to allow this innovation to come to the forefront. And I just want to very quickly raise 5 reasons why, or from 5 issues for us to consider. The first one is that we focus very much on technology and science. So we focus very much on the therapies, whereas this is not the only part that needs innovation. We also need to think about innovation in other sectors, in other parts of our sector. So the second one being the health system itself. We have health systems that haven't changed that much in the best part of 50 years. We still have a very doctor-dominated model. We have primary care, secondary care, tertiary care. This system itself is ripe for innovation, if you like, ripe for disruption. We see examples in India in specialization which have led to dramatic reduction of cost, dramatic improvement in health outcomes in terms of surgery through the way that the professionals have been trained and the system has been designed around it. Thirdly, the point about data. This is a really, really important point, and I'm glad that Ken brought it in at the beginning, and we don't really think about it. But the actual, what we consider data and privacy around data is very fluid. Now, my idea about what I consider to be private is probably different to someone who's 30 or 40 years older than I am. I'm more used to social media. I'm more used to showing myself in that setting. But someone, my niece, who's 15 or 17, her idea of what is private and non-private is considerably broader than my own. And I think we need to recognize that we're now putting the structures, the regulation into effect, which has, we're designing the future in terms of data and privacy based on the values of the past. And this is something that's very important, and we're inadvertently looking at creating barriers for ourselves. And a part of that as well is how we publish the results of of our innovation and our progress. We lock them behind closed doors. As an NGO without a huge budget for publications, I constantly try to, and my team, we try to find the newest research in whether it's health systems research or health innovation. And it's very difficult to find unless you're an academic, unless you pay for access. So we are creating these silos of information, of knowledge, which is actually very difficult to get to in this day and age, which is very open. And we need to consider what the impact that is having on our innovation model. And the fourth point, is the health professionals. Our health professionals themselves is the biggest barrier to take up of innovation. Even when we have got through the different levels, create the technological scientific innovation in the first place, getting it into the health system, bringing it out to those who know it, health professionals don't like it, actually. They like to stay with what they're familiar with, what they learned. How do we expand our ability to accept change, if you like, the cultural innovation that we need within our health professions, or even innovation within health professionals themselves? The barriers, for example, in certain countries that we know doctors put towards nurses prescribing medicine, something very simple. And most of all, we need to look at who is the innovator. And when we look at innovation, and this is a very good example, where does innovation happen? Actually, innovation mostly happens in small and medium enterprises amongst young people where there's high levels of risk and high levels of collaboration. When we look at who we fund to innovate, where does the money go? It goes towards the big beasts, the institutions. And those of us who work within institutions know that innovation and change is actually very difficult. Oh, you see, in my excitement, I've dropped my notes. But it's very difficult to get change and innovation in an organization that is institutionalized. So how do we create the incentives? How do we get the money to the small innovators at the bottom? Because we've built these great big trees, and apologies for those of you who've heard me use this analogy before, that are taking all the sunlight away from the SMEs, the little guys at the bottom that are actually producing the innovation on a day-to-day basis. So I just want to end there to say that we have the potential for these fantastic breakthroughs, not in 20 years, in 6 years, but we need to make sure that the money is going to the right place, the information is going out, we're looking at innovation in our systems, not just our technologies and our science, and we're funding the right people, and we're persuading our professionals to take this up. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Mark, this is unfair. Let me turn to you and ask you for your 3 minutes of insight before I ask the other panelists.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm now kicking myself for not having insisted that I spoke before Monica, because I was sitting there sort of mentally ticking off several of the points I was going to make. I thought she made a lot of very important points about the nature of innovation, that we tend to think of it as being something about breakthrough, something about new drugs, whereas in fact what we most need in health systems is innovations in delivery. But let me put that to one side and actually talk about how people usually do think of innovation, about these new drugs, new treatments, the sort of things that Professor Yamanaka so eloquently described. And just think about how well are we doing at the moment in health systems in generating those sorts of breakthroughs. And let me give you 3 ways of assessing how we're doing at the moment, what the outcomes are. First of all, the cost of bringing a new and complex drug to market for some difficult disease is probably now somewhere in the region of $1.3 to $1.7 billion. Huge, huge amount of money to bring a new drug to market. Another fact, health is probably the only major sector of the economy where innovation is adding to costs rather than reducing it. In other words, when you do computing, as you all know, you're getting faster computing and cheaper computing. And that goes for nearly every sector of the economy, not health. We're getting more health, but it's more expensive health. Technology is a driver of increasing health costs. And a third way of assessing whether our health innovation model is working is looking at what we most need at the moment. And it's one of those really worrying facts that there is actually very little action, not at the fundamental research level, but in terms of bringing new drugs to markets in things like new antibiotics, despite the rise in drug-resistant strains of various diseases. Very, very little is in the supply chain. Similarly, on dementia and Alzheimer's, nothing really now looking as if it's likely to come to market. More fundamental research, as Professor Yamanaka described, but nothing really looks as if it's about to come to market. I think you add those 3 things together, and I think it's reasonable to say that at the moment the health innovation model is broken. It's not working well at all. It's not delivering, even in that narrow sense of looking at new molecules, new drugs, it's not delivering what we need. I think there's problems right the way throughout the supply chain. You've only given me 3 minutes, so I obviously cannot go through all the different problems. No doubt that gives you a chance to ask me about them in the future. But I think there are problems right throughout the chain there. Thanks.
Thank you. As a good journalist, I'm diligently taking notes so that I can follow up during our conversation. Helga, please add your perspectives to this debate.
My perspective is a very different one. I'm one of the 44 million people diagnosed with dementia. All of you sitting here know the word Alzheimer's. Forget the word Alzheimer's, say dementia. We are 44 million people, and if I listen to this topic about innovation, I know that we are very far away from having a cure for us. I think we are the only ones who can tell you what it feels like living with this handicap. And it is not only about drugs. I know in the next 20 years, maybe a drug will be found, but we who are at an earlier age, I am one of the people who got diagnosed about 7 years ago. My diagnosis is Lewy body, and I know one day I'm going to have Parkinson. But I'm sitting here and I'm telling you that we are the experts. So if you talk about new treatments, about new forms, please don't forget to ask us. Mr. Professor, you had a very nice chart, new treatment, the patent, the ethics, the regulation, and so on. But we need the patient and the carer who can tell you best what and how drugs are functioning. I incline to suggest a kind of brain library where patients globally are interviewed how they felt about a drug 10 years ago, 7 years ago. My drug is excellent. Exelon developed also. I'm not advertising for any company, I just tell you my drug. But I know this Exelon brought on the market last year is simply fabulous, it's simply great. And still, drugs are not the only thing people with dementia need. I always hear about money, millions, billions, whatever. Dementia is a challenge for all societies. I need more the non-pharmaceutical intervention. And this would be an innovation if each of us becomes a dementia friend. And the figure told at the beginning was 44 million. And I am allowed to give you one more figure. Every 4 seconds, a person gets a new diagnosis of dementia on this earth. Every 4 seconds. And please count, because you are able, I am no more able. If these figures mass media give us, what happens 10, 20 years from now on? If that's right, dementia is not only the disease of elder people. 100 forms, the youngest people are 18, in the 30s, in the 40s. And globally, we are some millions. And innovation means, and this is one of the main points, in order to make plans, carry them out, evaluate, include the experts. And the experts are people who live daily, who can tell you. I was an interpreter in 7 languages. I was sitting there. You know what dementia makes? It is like a sponge. It takes away everything you learned. It takes many things away. But please focus on what is left, on the abilities. And this is a challenge, not for politicians. The politicians make new structures, invest money in research, make new professions, but the humans have to face this challenge. One more sentence. There is one organization in the world, and we have to mention them, that is Alzheimer Europe, who made an historic step 2 years ago. They set up a working group out of 22 countries in Europe. This working group consists only of people with dementia. Lewy body, Korsakoff, vascular, and so on, Alzheimer's. And we are working and we are making proposal. We have an advisory function. We are invited in the parliament. I am the chair of this group, and I am very honored that this is also innovation, to include people, to listen to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helga. Cyril.
So, I mean, as a leader of a pharma company, but also as a leader who, like all of us, is getting older, there is a slogan that I found, I believe, is particularly telling, which is the aging of our population is both a blessing, but also a challenge. I mean, if we look at the last century, I mean, in the last century, our population doubled more than twice. In the current century, it won't even double once, but within the next 25 years, the people aged 65 and plus will more than double. And we see a whole generation of people getting older who are going to impact the global economy and create massive health challenges. And our healthcare systems, and Monica talked extremely well about the healthcare system, are going to have to undergo a massive retooling if they are to be able to adapt and manage this this challenge. So we talk a lot about innovation, and drug is one of the key element, but one only of the element of the innovation continuum. I think one important element when we look at, and you mentioned some of the inefficiency of our innovation system. As a pharma leader, one of our key issues is our ability to move from companies who, for many years, were seen as provider of innovative drugs, as innovative as possible, to a true partner of the healthcare system along the continuum of care of the patient. I'm sure we're going to debate about this. Now, when we look at one of these major challenges, which is dementia, I mean, currently there are 70 different molecules that are being developed by the pharma, and more at earlier stages. We see many different research strategies, from the ones that are trying to, experimental drugs that are trying to attack the famous protein, the amyloid beta, others that are trying to prevent the effect that amyloid beta proteins have, other experimental programs that are looking at how, at very early stages, to prevent even patients from having the disease. But here, back to innovation. I mean, I'm not sure that the word innovation best applies when I hear the presentation that was given earlier, because I think a better word would be invention. And that's the major risk that we're having. That's the major challenge. I mean, we talk a lot about innovation and incremental innovation, but we are here, when we just heard about Professor's presentation and discovery, it's really about invention. It's like art. I mean, you can't ask an artist, paint me this fantastic painting that I will put it in a museum. So the challenge that we have as an industry, and that's why we talk about a significant change in paradigm of research, is to be able to, for sure, have the dollar investments, but also move in a very collaborative environment where we much more pool our early research, work better in public-private partnerships, so that there are closer ties with universities, with startups. Yes, there's a debate here between large institutes, but also startups. And we'll talk certainly about governments, and I will finish my 3 minutes here, but there is definitely major roles for public policy and governments in order to accompany the funding of basic science, because basic science remains so critical in this area of dementia and Alzheimer in our universities and incubators. Thank you.
Thank you, Cyril. So there's a lot of rich information to try to unpack in the rest of the panel. Let me start by making an observation, thinking about many of the points that you have raised, building on Yamanaka-sensei's comments. And let's turn directly to the innovation that won Professor Yamanaka a Nobel Prize. Professor, you are young. I remark that many of the images of the people on your slides were young. Between the balance of men and women, I counted parity. You presented 3 men and 3 women. You are a professor at Kyoto, but Todai usually gets a lot of the attention and a lot of the money. It seems that you represent a form of innovation that looks different than the way that many public healthcare systems and funding mechanisms normally treats innovation by, as Monica pointed out, giving money to old men and large institutions. What sort of advice could you give policymakers around the world when they think about how to foster innovation? Is there a truth here that we can see about putting money towards more risky but younger and more entrepreneurial researchers rather than deferring to the classic institutions that we tend to think of normally?
Well, it's a very important point. You know, for funding agencies, probably it would be easier for them to fund money to very famous scientists because they have a higher chance to publish good papers. But, you know, I am now 51, and I'm getting older, and I can sense I'm very different from what I used to be when I was 30 or early 40s. At that time, my brain was more innovative. Well, it was immature, so I needed more experiences, but my brain was full of good and stupid ideas. So it's very important to support those young, sometimes very smart, sometimes very stupid, can be stupid, but it is very important to support those young people as well. So, but I know it's easy to say, but actually very difficult to do. That's what we have been struggling with. You know, in our institute, I have been trying to recruit as many young researchers as possible as principal investigators. But there are many candidates. So it is very difficult to select who should be funded well. So well, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. But it's very challenging. It's very important, but it's a very difficult question.
Thank you. Mark.
Good. Thanks for giving me a chance to come back on that, because I think there is quite an important point here about funding agencies. And Professor Yamanaka did mention, he gave us a little view of the eTau breakthroughs and so on. It's one of the striking things about research agencies, even the ones that fund fundamental research, is that they are they sway with the fashion. And it's one of the unfortunate things at the moment that if you're researching in Tau, you're going to find it much easier to get funding at the moment. And you know, that's great. That clearly is a breakthrough. It's probably the most promising, I'm no scientist, but I'm told it's the most promising route at the moment that we have for Alzheimer's. But it's a little bit strange that we have Germans putting money towards Tau. We have the NIH in the US putting money towards Tau. We have the Canadians doing the same, the British doing the same. Everybody's going in the same direction, whereas surely, from the point of view of fundamental science, this is a bad thing. That actually what we want is much more diversity going on, and we shouldn't neglect all these other ideas and molecules going around there. And so we've sort of got this situation that everybody talks about fundamental science as being something, the role of government. But in fact, it's not, even that part of the system is not really working very well at the moment. There needs to be a way, I think, really, for people to discuss across countries and agree. If the NIH is doing a big funding program in Tau, maybe actually the Europeans shouldn't. And there should be something to do with an agreement, probably involving open science, to make sure that the people doing that fundamental research don't capture all the gains, because if that's the case, then of course everybody's right to be throwing all their money in the same direction. But that will actually block breakthroughs in science and fundamental research. So even that part of the system for developing new molecules for innovation, for invention, whatever you call it, is not really working in the way that we think it should at the moment.
Mark, let me pick up on one thing that you mentioned and ask the rest of the panelists to respond to, and then I'd like the people in the audience to come up with questions. We have a few here on the Ysembly system, but come up with questions as well, because we're going to turn to you. And that is this idea of capturing gains and what to do about data and open research. I think that if a Martian was to land on planet Earth and to look at how our innovation system works for healthcare, they would see so much data collected, for example, during drug trials and at research labs, that are simply locked away and not opened. And it would be perplexing to them. It should be perplexing to us. How did a system ever emerge where we have the scientific method, where practices need to be open, where we need to disclose so much in the process of coming up with findings, yet the fundamental data upon which the findings are made have no corollary requirement that they be made open as well. It seems to me that if we were to design the scientific method from first principles, of course the data would be open, and our metaphorical Martian landing on Earth would be perplexed, mystified. Why is the data not open? We now see the value of it. So I'd like to ask everyone on the panel what you think. Do you think that this situation is sustainable, or do you think that it's just common sense and maybe it should even be somehow either part of the best practices of science and healthcare, or legislated that data associated to, say, a drug therapy or a treatment becomes part of an open commons? Particularly when you consider that drugs have to go through many hoops to get approval, maybe the data associated with that approval process becomes open for other researchers to learn from. Monica, Helga?
Yes, absolutely. And this health is a public good, and this so from a principles perspective, but also in just sheer common sense that what we're producing and how, if we really want to make significant progress, we need to be using what we have in a much better way. Although I would say one thing, I think if Martians were to land here, I think the first thing they would notice is how much we spend on mopping up the problems that we've caused ourselves. So if 97% of our healthcare expenditure goes to treating us when we're sick, even though we can prevent so much of that sickness in the first place. Only 3% of our healthcare expenditure goes to keeping us healthy rather than treating us when we're sick. And this is something that, when we talk about our healthcare system, it's actually a sickness system. And we need to also, that's not the place today, but the innovation in terms of keeping us healthy in the first place. Even in issues such as dementia, we have a lot that we can do in order to keep people healthy and functioning, which we don't look at enough.
Let's just take a quick second on that. What, in a minute, would that be?
Keeping people healthy. Well, for example,
particularly in the case of dementia.
In dementia, there's all. I mean, I'm not the right person to talk to. I think Helga's probably the better person to answer, and specifically in things such as brain training and exercise, and also the way that we've organised and built our society so that we're incentivized, for example, to overconsume. I mean, it's crazy the way. And I've used this example in this forum many times before. But actually, the best thing that any of us could do for the economy tomorrow is to go out there and be hit by a bus. Because if we're hit by a bus, we start to stimulate all the services around it. We have to go to the healthcare system, which is expensive. If we die, even better, because then the funeral services are stimulated, the flowers, the clothes, the catering, even a new car. I mean, the best thing that we can do for our economies is to go out there and get sick, or to go out there and get hit by a bus.
Monica, can I just say, you speak for yourself. The economy would suffer if I
yes, of course, Mark, of course. But I mean, the whole system that we've designed is to patch up little bits of problems. We have a fundamental dysfunction in the way that we measure and treat progress within our society, and we can't keep people healthy. In fact, we push ourselves, we work too hard, we don't see our family enough, we're not social enough, we're not living very well. And then we're wondering why we can't keep up with the innovation to make us better.
I don't want to stray. That's interesting, and I goaded you to speak more, but I don't want to lose sight of the principal point, which is about healthcare, because I'm going to turn to Cyril and ask him what he thinks about, not healthcare, open data, and ask him what he thinks about this idea if we were to mandate taking your proprietary information. But before I ask that, let me ask someone who represents patients.
Yes.
What do you think?
Well, I can tell you for hours what I think. Now, referring to this data aspect, Alzheimer Europe and the countries, 36 countries that belong to this association, get per year surveys, so forms, and the countries fill out. You can check it at the end of the year. under AE, Alzheimer Europe. There you have the exact statistics in which country, at what age, what is diagnosed, how long did it take till one gets diagnosed, because this is very different. And this is also important in this evaluation to compare. And a very important aspect is for the people who get diagnosed early, the post-diagnostic support. That means what possibilities do we have to train the existing abilities, as Monica mentioned. Brain walk and so on is just a small part, but also how many neurologists, psychiatrists are in a country. And you will see the difference between Northern Europe, the South, or the East. And I want to make an addition to the aspect where you said in different countries they are researching or investing money. Our group, consisting of people from 22 countries, exchange the ideas they have in dementia. Why should Sweden, they are, for example, and Finland leading? A country like Poland, a country like Portugal, Spain can learn. Why should they do the same teachings, the same programs again? Take people from there, exchange your ideas, share. And this means also networking, and on the other hand, the financial aspect. So I think this data collecting is very important. It is a sensitive aspect when people with dementia can't decide for themselves. Then the carer has to decide, does he provide the data or not? We suggest, as long as we can speak up for ourselves, give the data, because it is promising and important for the people who analyze it for the future.
Okay. Perhaps the default should be actually in the other way. Perhaps it's impossible to opt out. Perhaps it should be mandated that the patient data become part of the data commons because it's so valuable socially. The private sector would probably have a view on this. Cyril.
It's a question of the right balance, I'd say. I mean, and I can talk about our company for what I know. I mean, for years, first of all, we've published whatever the results of the clinical trials are, our results on public sites, public websites, and we've shared these results. When it comes to specific data, the way we operate is we have large clinical database, and we receive a lot of requests from scientists, investigators, and we look at them request by request, because as you can imagine, there are a number of issues at stake, and one of it being intellectual property in the phases of obviously developing a drug. Now, there's quite a lot of discussions at the moment in various large organizations, including at European level, around how to accelerate the sharing of data, and we as a company are actively part of these discussions, because there is a need to go further, but finding the right way to obviously manage data privacy, patient data, which is very sensitive information, and notions of intellectual property. But there is progress ahead, and I believe that some policies and systems will be developed in the coming years. Now, there's also the whole issue of real-world evidence data, where I mean, the industry is increasingly investing, because I mean, our biggest challenge today, I mean, we talk a lot about pipeline and bringing new drugs, but there is a major question around real-world utilization of the drug and following on the efficacy of the drug in the real life. So, I mean, one of the new paradigm is around real-world evidence data, big data, and our ability to really follow through our drugs, practices, and impact the way the healthcare systems, again, integrate innovation in over time. And there it's it's both a role for our industry to play, but there's also quite a bit of policy decisions from governments. If I take in the case of France, where the CNAM has huge databases. I mean, there's a big debate around our ability to access some of that data, these databases, to make better decisions and accelerate drug development.
Okay. So we have a huge list of questions from the oecdblue system, and it's about financing. But before I do that, I see someone from the audience who has a hand up who would like to pose a question. So please, madame, hold your hand a little higher and we'll have a microphone come to you. If you like, please identify yourself, but you're not obligated.
Yes, my name is Helena Bruce, and I'm a retired pharma executive and also had some role in health and innovation at the OECD in the past. I would like, first of all, to thank you for an excellent panel. And the fact that was mentioned by Monica and others that the innovation does not take place just in large institutions. And it seems to me that, and it was not mentioned, that the problem is a little bit with incentives, that the intellectual property protection is particularly strong and good when it comes to drug development, and we all know that. And the problem is how to pick up and encourage innovation that is processed. And I want to, not to be general, first of all, I want to mention Christopher Reeve. That was, an inspiration. From personal experience, I know, and from all the literature, Christopher Reeve inspired exchange between patients. He, in addition to funding research on spinal cord, he funded a lab at Rutgers University that specifically encouraged paralyzed people to exchange information and to report on new things. This is one example. Another example, I recently came across work that could be very hopeful in dementia, or at least in people who pre-dementia. And that involves, and there's a lot written about it, it's electrical stimulation of the brain. It's successful in spinal cord. It is also involves exchanges. There's an International Brain Institute or company that exchanges EEG maps of brains, which would be and there's some theory that will allow objective measure of improvement of performance. Maybe that doesn't apply to dementia, but pre-dementia. How is this innovation going to be encouraged financially? Because the minute somebody publishes something about that, they will not be able to capture the financial benefits and have the power to bring it to the patient. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very useful. Before we actually return to the panelists and ask about this, why don't we take a similar question, because many of them are about financing and how we encourage it. And this is a question that is, what can be done so that public investment in basic research translates into affordable health technology, inventions, and medicines? There's lots of questions that's similar to yours that focus on how do we create the right incentive structure to bring new therapies to market. Who on the panel would like to take that question first? Mark.
This is a huge topic. The basic problem with the way that we finance drugs, but also new innovations in health, is that we don't give incentives to the right people to do the innovations. I mean, the basic way we pay for drugs is you give people a patent extension for a certain period of time, then they get the price that they manage to negotiate with the regulatory authorities, with the government, times the number of drugs that they sell. Well, in many respects, that's actually a useless way of paying for innovations. I mean, for example, one of the topics I mentioned right at the beginning was a new antibiotic to cope with drug-resistant strains. The whole point there is that we want to have a new drug which is never used. So the queue, we want to be zero. We only want to hold that in reserve for those really catastrophic cases where there's some new disease comes out. So already you can start understanding why we've made so little progress in getting new antibiotics, so that price times quantity element isn't working. even when it is working, you sort of could see that it should work with these 44 million, 170 million, I don't know, depends on your definition of people suffering from dementia, that you should be able to have a pretty good quantity of drugs sold. But I think I understand pharmaceutical companies when they complain that the risk is absolutely enormous. They have this huge cost in running these clinical trials, lots and lots of failures going on. How can even a large pharmaceutical company cope with the amount of risk involved in a new trial like that? They want to be able to share the risk with society. And that means talking about these public-private partnerships. The trouble I have with that is that I hear pharmaceutical companies talking about that, and I hear governments sort of receiving it in a nice way. I'm not convinced, however, that governments have the capacity to engage in that sort of negotiation with pharmaceutical companies. I think it requires a degree of knowledge about likely success of new innovations, about the likely effectiveness, about the social benefits of new innovations that actually governments don't have. And so I feel to some extent that whilst Big Pharma has changed to a great deal towards a more sustainable model, at least in the way that they talk about innovation, I'm not convinced that actually governments can make that particular model work.
It seems to me that there might be even a more fundamental question here, because to understand Professor Yamanaka's research, we're not going to simply be targeting drugs at the population level, but to the individual level. So the whole idea of clinical trials themselves need to change. But Professor Yamanaka, on the question of financing.
Yeah, it's very important. So Mark mentioned that it is new technology which actually increase health cost. And I think it's true if the innovation is done in private companies. But in the case of iPS cells, we did that in universities, Kyoto universities. So we spend a lot of our time and efforts to secure basic patents of iPS cell technologies from Kyoto universities. It is very important for us because patent for private companies means a way to monopolize the technology, to secure a monopoly. But for us, Kyoto University, patent means a way to prevent monopoly. Now we have a good patent of iPS cell generation so that we can allow academia people freely use iPS cell technologies. And we have license to many, many private companies to use iPS cell technologies with a very low licensing cost. So I think that's one of very important points to make new technologies not too expensive. You know, again, my vision is to help patients with science. But if it's too expensive, we can only help rich patients. We want to help all the patients. So to that end, I think it is very important for academia, for universities, to secure patents. So again, it is important to collaborate with companies, with pharmaceutical companies. But at the same time, we need to compete with each other. Because if pharmaceutical companies own the patents, the cost can be very expensive. But if we, academia, universities, have the patent, we can control the cost. So that's what we have been trying to do.
I think there's if I may, a point that is important to keep in mind, especially when new technology is not only drugs, but when we think of drug budgets, they still represent an average of less than 15% of the healthcare budget. So there is the inherent debate around the cost of drugs, but there is the bigger debate around the efficiency that we drive by the appropriate integration of innovation within the healthcare system. Now, I mean, when we look at research today and funding of research, there are clearly three stages, and you've mentioned them better than I can do, with basic research, and then biotech incubators, and you talked quite a bit around the licensing of your invention, and then the very large clinical trials, billion and above, that are required to bring a drug to market. There was an excellent article over the weekend by the head of research of Johnson & Johnson in French newspaper Le Monde, and he was comparing it a bit to discovering a drug and discovering and building a new airplane type Airbus. Discovering a drug bringing it to market is going to cost around 1/10. But up to the last patient in the drug development program, for which we will have made a decision far, far before we know the outcome, up to the last patient, they can be a failure. And even once the drug is used in real life, it's a decision of using it or not using it. Through the development of the plane, we can continue adapting, innovating, and through its usage over 20 years, it's being improved. So the fundamental risk, and you've said it very well, is totally different.
It's a very good point. Helga.
Yes, I would like to add something. The point of the patient. We don't want drugs all the time. And it's not possible to make drugs tailored, specific for each one. More important is the professional, the doctor who treats us, the neurologist, to take the time and to see the person as a whole being and not only prescribing the drug. What are other possibilities? What programs can he offer me besides only his drug? And here, this is also the wish of our working group. Even if they are professionals working for 10, 20 years in the field, they are, let's say, the drug, goodbye, see you in 3 months. And the first question after you come back in 3 months is one, you know which one? What else is worse with you? Can you tell me? And if you are together with someone, he doesn't talk to you. He talks to the person accompanying you. Please, we are with deficiencies, but we are able to understand. On the other hand, the language, I have to say, gentlemen, you use here so quick, so fast, so long sentences. A person with dementia is not able to follow. I have a plus. I was an interpreter in the neurological branch. I know what you are talking about. My biography is different, but take the other millions, they can't follow you. If the speed is different, and I think a less speedy way is maybe comfortable for all of you, isn't it? You don't answer, that's okay. Okay, so drugs, the doctors have to get a training, and on the other hand, I think this individual is actually the attitude. Each patient with a severe diagnosis has to develop an attitude. We say we can't always rely on what the health system offers. We ourselves have to contribute. And this is an enormous step and an innovation. But in order to be able to have this attitude, you know what we need? No, you don't. We need a psychological guidance, because depression develops something that makes me giving me a bit more energy and telling me, well, it makes a sense going on to live. The doctor says in 2 years Parkinson, but I'm still happy, I'm energetic. Give us a drug. My drug is my belief. But what about the other millions in this world? I give an example. I was at a conference of Johnson & Johnson. What about focusing on something called like brain food? I don't tell you what it is. You can Google it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Monica, there's many barriers to financing innovation in healthcare. How do we overcome them?
Thank you.
We only have a few minutes
so you're
left.
trying to get me back to the subject, but I'm going to support Helga on this one. And it's really sexy and it's really easy for us to focus on the drugs. It's really very appealing because it's a pill. It's something that we can see, that we can consume. It's the solution. It's the magic bullet. And it really, really isn't. And we have a patient here with dementia who is telling us very clearly, I don't want your pills. And we're not listening to her. We have 44 million people. In 25 years' time, 100 and whatever. That's not just more pills. That's going to change society completely. The people caring for people with dementia are some of the lowest paid people in our societies. They're low-paid immigrants. These are people who are doing one of the most important jobs within our society, caring for the increasingly vulnerable, and yet we ignore that aspect to this in terms of innovation. We ignore the fact that, maybe we need to change the way that we build our cities. Maybe we need to look at the fact that it's very difficult to navigate a metro system, that it's not very good for anyone. If you're pushing a pram, or if you're wearing high heels, actually, it's also quite challenging. By improving the way that we build our environments, by improving the way that we organize ourselves structurally and socially, we can improve outcomes from people with dementia, because we're not going to have a cure tomorrow for dementia, but we still have 44 million people who need care, who need to live the rest of their lives in dignity and with respect. And when we talk about pills, and when we focus on pills, then we ignored the human aspect within that. So I'm going to support Helga. I know your question was, how do we pay for it? And actually, I do have a comment in terms of public-private partnerships, and we feel very strongly as an organisation, and you can Google us to see who we are, that when we have a joint risk, we should have joint benefits. If the public sector is taking a risk in terms of new drugs, new antibiotics or whatever, then part of those returns have to come back. We cannot have the public sector taking the risk and all of the profits going through to the private sector. So I will answer your question at the end.
Thank you, Monica. You've done a beautiful job. It is left for me now to give a closing remark and then to thank the panelists. I think the only remark to say, to sort of find a way that draws a line between the beginning and the end, is to say that, to echo simply what you have said, which is, there is no cure. There is no pill that we can take, not simply for dementia, but for innovation in healthcare, that there's no one thing that we can do. However, we can see that not only does the problems cut through lots of different aspects of society, there's no solution to it either. We're not going to find resources, financial resources that we didn't have, so it's going to have to come from somewhere. The data is going to be very, very valuable if there's going to be calls not to share it. And the only certainty is that there's going to be more and more people with dementia and other healthcare problems. So please join me in thanking the panelists today. Thank you.